Hello, everybody, and welcome to our workshop on producing sustainable festivals. As I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, please select speaker view in your Zoom controls and stay muted. And Vivian, you can go to the next slide. I'm Stephen Pollack, the founding past president of SENFC, the Sustainable Events Network, Florida and Caribbean. SENFC is presenting today's program in partnership with the Chaplin School of Hospitality and Tourism Management at Florida International University. On behalf of SENFC, I'd like to thank Dean Michael Chang for his great support on this project. Now I'd like to give you some background on today's two outstanding presenters. Dan Cormany has rejoined the faculty of Florida International University's Chaplin School of Hospitality and Tourism Management after teaching at FIU for 5 years and serving as founding instructor for their bachelor's degree in event management. Prior to that, he taught for 5 years at the Hara Hotel College at UNLV, Las Vegas, where he also earned his second master's and a doctoral degree in hotel administration. From 2016 to 2019, he taught in Silicon Valley, focusing on his areas of expertise: special event, trade show, and convention management, and the topic of his dissertation, medical tourism. Prior to his time at UNLV, he worked for 17 years as Dean of Students and a senior officer at universities in Ohio, Florida, and Hawaii, before embarking on a career change to tourism. His hotel work included management positions for Loews Hotels, Hyatt Regency, and Wynn Las Vegas. He holds a Master of Arts degree in college administration from Bowling Green State University in Ohio, and a Bachelor of Arts, summa cum laude, from the University of Akron in communication. His event management background includes work on 7 of the 10 largest trade shows held in the United States: Renaissance and Native American festivals, fundraisers, cultural and popular concerts, and many conferences and conventions. Presenting today with Dan is Vivian Belzaguy, who has a passion for utilizing events as a platform for much needed social change. After 13 years in the events industry, she grew tired of seeing events create more environmental impact in one day than she felt she could in her lifetime. She was the sustainability director for the Ultra Festivals and has executed sustainability plans for events up to 50,000 attendees, and founded Ascendance Sustainable Events, becoming part of the shift that will have the events industry teach the world how to take better care of our planet. I'd like to note that a recording of today's program will be made available on the SENFC website at senfc.org. As we go through the program, please enter any questions you might have in the chat box. At the end of the program, we'll answer as many as we can. And again, please stay muted and select speaker view in your Zoom controls. And now, here's Dan to get us started.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here mostly to explain why, and Vivian talks a lot about the how. She's an expert in that. But our case for festivals, if you are over 40, such as I am, I'm way over 40, you may have only a passing knowledge of music festivals and how important they have become in our culture. There are over 800 that were scheduled for last year, or for this year. Many of them were postponed or canceled, but they were providing opportunities kind of unmatched in bringing people to, I am getting a message that I'm very difficult to hear. I don't know what else to do. I'm sorry. I'll try to speak up louder. Hope that's better. they're kind of unmatched in bringing people together and creating positive community impacts. Outside of a trade show or a convention, there are very few things that bring as many people together. Of those 800 festivals last year, uh, most of them are drawing somewhere between 40 and 100,000 people per day. So naturally, that means that it's also impacting the business in the area as well, too. It has a very positive impact, particularly on the hospitality and tourism businesses in an area. Matter of fact, not only does it have an impact on the area, but in some cases, such as in Croatia, where there's an Ultra Croatia, it has a national impact on their GDP because of the size and the importance of the conference or of the festival. We also have, in addition to music festivals, and something else that we're going to be considering along the line here, are wine and food festivals. And there were over 6,000 of those in the country last year, too, and we're slated for this year. However, here's the difficulty with all festivals. There's a temporary nature that makes them inherently wasteful, that we need to put something together quickly, and then afterwards we're ready to dispose of it. And at times, as Vivian mentioned in a comment earlier, or I guess in her introduction earlier, we can do more damage in a festival in one day than an individual can do in an entire lifetime. So a festival sets up expectations in the community. It can cause ripples to fan out within a community and impact the community in either a very positive or a very negative way. There we go. So what kind of ripple are you going to be starting? When we're coming back from the coronavirus, we have an opportunity to reset. We can continue on with, as some festivals have done, enabling pollution and creating unnecessary waste. That has been the modus operandi of festivals up until recently. We can also damage natural habitats, and that's not just where the festival is going on. It may also be habitats such as the carbon footprint that we are using in getting people to our festivals by air or by road. We can condone unconscious behavior by not speaking out against behavior that is wasteful by our attendees and our vendors. And in doing so, we jeopardize our own reputation and our relations, not just with the people who are attending, but also with the community that has approved of the festival happening and needs to give us permits each year in order for that to happen. We can encourage others to behave irresponsibly by simply looking the other way. Or, after COVID, we can work at preventing pollution and reducing waste, as Ultra has been doing and as Vivian has been doing for Ultra. We can protect natural habitats, not only, again, the place where the festival happens, but also all the natural habitats that are affected through the production of the festival. We can use the opportunity to educate our attendees on behaving in a conscious way, and that we can do through a number of ways that Vivian will be going into. But we can use this as a consciousness awareness, not only for our attendees, but also we can be setting an example for the community as a whole, where they can be learning from us. Imagine that, learning from a festival. And not only would the community learn from the festival, but other events can also learn from our example. So the purpose of what we're going to be talking about today is to go beyond sustainability to regeneration, and that needs to really have a genesis with the event organizer, because he or she is setting the sustainable values and directing the whole team to do the same.
All right, and if you want, I'll take it from there, Dan. So thank you so much for having me to the SCNFC And thank you so much for that, such a nice introduction. I am, in fact, super passionate about our ability for, as event organizers and as just people in the events industry, people who even attend events, to really use these events as a platform for the change that we really need in order to kind of rescue our planet from the situation that we've put it in. So I love participating in conversations like this, and then I'm excited to answer some questions at the end. And yeah, as Dan has put so perfectly, you know, we just really have an opportunity to create either positive or negative impacts in our communities. And this is true, you know, regardless of the fact that events are happening right now. This is why this is such an important time for us to be discussing this, is because eventually events will come back, and we know that they'll come back in full force, right? People are just itching to get back to events, and when they come back, you know, I can imagine that they're just going to come back bigger and better than ever. And so really right now is our real opportunity to learn and to take some time to rethink how we can host these events so that we can have a positive impact instead of a negative impact. So that's what we kind of talk about here on this slide. This is the ripple effect that can happen, right? And this ripple can be either good or bad. It can be a little bit of both. But the idea is, let's start making positive ripples little by little so that we can then, you know, have those positive ripples come out into the entire world, really. And one thing I like to say about this is that it's not always black or white, right? It's not always all positive or all negative. As long as we're starting to change our impact from a negative to a positive one, we're stepping in the right direction. You know, from all the sustainability professionals that I know, nobody is demanding that we be 100% sustainable, that we be, you know, striving for perfection. What we want is progress, and what we want is an awareness of how we're able to, you know, to impact our communities, and then just putting some thought behind that impact and how it looks. So this is a great example. The event organizer, once they really, you know, adopt sustainable values, they are thinking about how their impact is going to, you know, ripple through the community, and they say, you know what, we're committed to this, we're committed to making progress, committed to doing everything that we can to be a positive impact, then those values start to get communicated to their staff. And one thing I want to say about this is that we use the word community in a lot of different ways. In this aspect, we're using it as like kind of the external community, but there's also an internal community for each event, right? And that includes the employees and staff, the vendors, and the vendors, everybody who's putting on the event. So the event organizer, once they adopt sustainable values, they get to communicate that to their internal community so that it can then go and ripple out to the external community. So when the event organizer communicates this to their employees and staff, the employees and staff get it. Hopefully they get some education on what the strategy is going to be, or they get some direction on, okay, guys, you go and figure out how we're going to do this more positively. And then that starts to create a ripple out to the vendors and to anybody else that's involved in actually executing the event, right? Because then the employees and staff, they say, okay, guys, you know, how do we do this better? They reach out to their power company, reach out to their food suppliers, you know, how can we be conscious of the environment with our event this time around? So that's where it starts to ripple out to the vendors. And then once everybody's really on board, once the entire internal community is on board, that's when the attendees can start to see and realize that something is changing within the event, right? So not only is this something that is observed at the actual event and that they can participate in at the event, but it can be communicated and educated to them prior to the event. So it can be something like, you know, a marketing campaign similar to what we did with Ultra. It was called the Mission Home campaign. And that started, I think, 3-4 weeks out from the event. I think it was actually 4 or 5 weeks out from the event. And that really started to tell them, hey, we're paying attention now, and we want you all to join us in this process. Then that is when the community really starts to see the impact, right? The community can then see this program, that is, you know, visible on the event's website or in social media, and they can now start to understand that the event is doing something different. And hey, maybe the community now wants to attend your event to see how, you know, how you're executing it on site. Make sure that you're being honest about what you're doing. So not only can it start to create some buzz for you, kind of, you know, in the news and in social media, but it can also actually attract new attendees, right? To see how you're doing it and see how others can do it. And then, of course, once the community is involved, you know, and this isn't just by attending the event, it's not just by hearing about it, but it's also part of the attendees experiencing the sustainability initiatives at your event, and then going out into the community after your event and being a bit of a changed person after receiving that education and learning something new at your event. So the community might see it, they might experience it, they might just see it, you know, without even knowing that it came from your event. But the community then has a benefit because we have all of these educated, you know, more educated event attendees that are now living in the community. And that's how we start to impact our planet in a more positive way now that we have all of these more educated community members living on this planet, right? So it sounds like a lot of extra work. We know that. And it can be, but it can also be relatively easy. And that's something that we'll work through on the more how to do this slide. But yeah, this is something that it's not only about, is it worth it to you from, you know, an event organizer perspective, but is it worth it to the planet? And the answer is yes. You know, sometimes we think, oh, it's just one plastic bottle. It's just one, you know, one thing I didn't, you know, I didn't recycle. It's just one thing, you know, and no, that multiplied by so many of us really, really adds up to impacts on the planet. And if you're in here, I assume that you know what a dire state the planet is in right now. I just saw in the news the other day that, you know, in New York, we now have a countdown going on the side of a building that says we have 7 years before, you know, the effects of climate change are irreversible. So I assume that if you're in here, you know what a dire situation we're in and how urgent this is. But yeah, I mean, where the climate is changing, our landfills are filling, our waters are full of pollution, which ends up in our food supplies. Our forests are being chopped down. We have forest fires everywhere. The polluted air is actually, you know, not only is it contributing to other diseases, but it's actually making, you know, the impacts of coronavirus worse on certain communities. So there really is something that gets to be done by every person. And what's beautiful about events is that by making small decisions, we really are able to make larger impacts than just ourselves. And that's why the leadership of events has a huge impact. Events serve as a training grounds, as we talked about, for the vendors, for the staff, for the attendees, and how they go out into the community afterwards. They also serve as a prototype for how cities can function even, right? With an event as large as Ultra, we had our very own waste management process. We had our very own kind of recycling process. We really kind of, you know, were able to make 50,000 people, you know, behave in a way that worked in order to get 100% acceptance of our recycling at our facilities. So that is a really amazing thing about events, is that it kind of is a microcosm of how a city works or how a local community works, and can actually be teaching these communities about how they can function that's better for the planet. And then, of course, there's the benefits for you. So there's these, you know, benefits over here that we talk about on the left on the planet, but there's these benefits to you as an event organizer or as an event vendor that really kind of start to show up and are starting to become more and more important. So for example, with me at Ultra, you know, I'm looking for vendors who can tell me, yes, we know how to operate sustainably. Yes, we know how to, you know, how to be responsible about our impact and our sourcing, so that I, you know, as an event organizer, don't have to worry about that so much. And that happens throughout all events. And as sustainability becomes more and more trendy, this is something that will become more and more important for the brand equity of your company, regardless of whether it's the event or as a vendor or anybody who can participate in an event. And then, of course, there's coming legislation, right? We've seen plastic bans that are starting to pop up all over the country. We've seen, activism also that's on a rise. So it's about being proactive instead of waiting for these things to happen to us and then having to, kind of catch up and figure out a way to make it work in a way that's now, in line with new legislation or with local activism that's happening. So we don't want to get caught in that kind of ugly space of, oh no, we know how much stress it is to organize an event. We don't want to get caught in the last few weeks trying to figure something out and maybe it won't work. So every time we say next time, the more it costs, right? So that's again going back to this. Every time we are not proactive, we do have a potential issue that arises later, right? Whether it's for you or for the planet. That's the bigger one, right? But of course, looking at the benefits that are in it for you, right? There is a lot there as well. This isn't just about being good to the planet. It's not just about doing the right thing. There's a lot of opportunities, not only in marketing and community opportunities like we've talked about, but there's also cost saving and revenue generating opportunities that come along with sustainability. So I'll go into those two, since we know the events industry is struggling right now. We're waiting to come back. Certainly when we come back, we're going to be trying to do the things as cheaply as possible so that we can, get those revenues back that we've lost this year. But thinking about sustainability as a way to save money or to make money is a great way for us to really, really think about this before we do come back, so that it actually helps our bottom lines. So some of the ways that are cost-saving sustainability initiatives are: you can reduce your costs on cleaning crews. So for example, if you have a really, really great pollution prevention campaign, which we'll go into in the next few slides, then you might not need your cleaning crews for that long, and that can cut your hourly rates on your cleaning crews. If you save on water or electricity, if you find ways to use ground power versus generators, that all lowers your utility bills, right? And then in revenue generating opportunities, the greatest way is sponsorships. And I know a lot of the events in here probably have a lot of great sponsor relationships. I say that you probably have, double the opportunities of sponsor relationships, because of the fact that a lot of sponsors are looking for ways to be good to the environment as part of their corporate social responsibility campaigns or as part of their own initiatives, and they might not have cool ways to do that that are as cool as doing something at an event. So in a lot of ways they're looking for these activations, but they might not have the platform to do that. So your event could be a great way for those sponsors to come and activate their CSR campaigns or anything that they want to do for sustainability. Another thing is having sustainable souvenirs. So for example, if you have reusable cups that you're going to sell, you can either sell these as an option, or you can have, ask attendees to either bring their own reusable cup if that's something that's allowed, or you can sell the reusable cup and say, you know what, this is just the way we do things. We're not going to use plastic cups anymore. We don't want to create that waste. So everybody has to buy a cup or bring their own cup, and then you can make some money selling the actual cups. I've also seen some great models for this where there's like a rental program with a deposit system, and there's some great companies that do this, like Our Cup is one of them, and there's another one out of New York, Cup Zero. So there's a few awesome companies that will actually rent the cups for you. They'll manage the whole process, and then you get a cut of the deposits and the purchases that are kept. And then ticket price increases, finally. So there is research that shows that 73% of millennials are willing to pay more for for sustainability. So that's something to think about, is that as the time goes on, you may be able to increase your ticket prices because you can say, this is a sustainable event. We do a lot of work, on the back end to make sure that we're sustainable. And so we're increasing our ticket prices as part of, our ecological program. It's also something where you could do potentially an add-on. So let's say an eco ticket, for example, that comes with a reusable cup, a reusable straw, it comes with something, and they can add that onto the price of their ticket in an easy way. And then you make an extra buck.
Vivian, if I might chime in here for just a moment.
Sure.
I've been teaching for 12, 14 years on a college level. And when we've always had a focus on sustainability in the classes, but the attitude of the students were, yeah, that's fine as long as it doesn't cost us more. But that has been changing. That has really changed in the last 3 or 4 years. And this 73% of the millennials that Vivian is talking about here, I've seen that in the classroom as well. They are also smart enough that if you're trying to greenwash them, they will see that too. So you really need to be doing a real effort on sustainability, and then you'll get the support of the millennials and Gen X.
Yep. Agree. And that's a great point, Dan. It's something that's actually discussed in the guide, which I know we'll talk about a bit later, but we go into a whole piece about integrity and making sure that anything that you communicate out to your community about what it is that you're going to do to be sustainable at your event, that you make sure that you're able to actually deliver on that before you communicate it. Because the worst thing is to appear as if you're trying to lie to appear green, and then really when people who come to your event and know how these things work realize that it's actually not being very green at all. So that's something that you definitely want to avoid. Okay, and I'll pass it over to Stephen to go over the Sustainable Development Goals and how those tie in.
Okay. The Sustainable Development Goals, commonly referred to as the SDGs, were adopted by the United Nations in 2015 as a universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity by 2030. The objective was to produce a set of goals that meet the urgent environmental, political, and economic challenges that are facing our world. The 17 SDGs are interconnected because action in one area will affect outcomes in others. And all of the actions in general have to balance social, economic, and environmental sustainability. In other words, success in one goal affects success for others. The SDGs are unique because they cover issues that affect everyone. They represent an ambitious international commitment to build a more sustainable, safer, and more prosperous planet for all humanity, and to end poverty permanently everywhere, leaving no one behind. The URL above the graphics on this slide will take you to a web page that will give you a detailed history of how the SDGs were developed, and you can click on any one of the goals for a deep dive into the various targets within the goal and a recap of the progress that's been made on that goal in every year since 2016. As we go through the rest of this presentation, we'll be noting which of these goals are served by each of the sustainable practice areas we'll be discussing. And with that said, here's Dan to get us started on exploring the fundamentals of sustainable practices for festivals.
Wonderful. Might we go back one slide, please, to the sustainable goals? If that's not possible, that's all right. But we had, yes, you can see that of the 17 goals that are set here, all but the 4 that are in brown are going to be addressed by us. We are now moving from what we need to be doing and why we need to be doing it to how are we going to be doing this. And we're going to do this in 5 areas in particular. And I'm sorry I toss the curveball to the person who is making the slide changes here. But our 5 focuses for this are going to be: how do we prevent pollution? How do we reduce waste? What can we do for nature conservation and natural resource management? And if those two don't make, if you don't understand the difference between those two, you will a little bit here. And also, how do we engage the community? So Vivian, let's get started.
Okay, so we'll start with preventing pollution. And as I mentioned before, all of this is available on my website as well, on greenyearevent.com. It goes into a bit more detail on, like I said, the integrity and how to avoid greenwashing and make sure that you are, communicating your sustainability campaign in a way that is also, just making sure that your brand is protected. And then it goes into these 5 and actually 6. We just added a new one, areas that you can focus on. So with preventing pollution, what you want to keep in mind is that this is a goal before, during, and after the event. Sometimes it's an afterthought until the event is over and we find that the grounds are trashed, and now how are we going to clean this mess up? Well, the way to do that is to avoid the grounds getting trashed in the first place. So a way, a key way when we're talking about like the internal communities is to make sure that you're educating your vendors and attendees before and during the event, so that you can create this behavior change of not having them trash the place in the first place, right? So another way to do this is make sure that you have a proper cleaning crew and that you have just kind of everything available to the attendees, like trash cans and recycling bins if you're doing recycling, that's very accessible, that it's very well lit, well signed, just that it's very evident that this is important to the event and giving your attendees access. So other ways to prevent pollution are to create bans against using certain items which are, really big polluters. So for example, balloon releases are absolutely awful for the environment. Balloons float up and then they must come down. So they end up in the water. We've all probably seen these horrible pictures of turtles and stingrays with, balloons tied around their little hands and everything. We want to make sure that we don't end up having that in our waters. And then we also have styrofoam, which is, this is kind of an opposite problem, right? Instead of, kind of floating away and going and ending up in the water, styrofoam breaks down into these little tiny pieces, and it sometimes ends up in our storm drains. It ends up kind of coming through our processes in our cities and ends up in the water that way. This is the same story with confetti and glitter. So anything that breaks up into these little pieces, cigarette butts is another great example of this. They are really, really easily caught by rains and put into our storm drains and then end up in our bay or in the ocean. And then there's also, the ones that just end up staying in the ground. This is also really important to not have, these minuscule pieces ending up in our soil, because that's not good for our soil health. It's not good for the way that, our trees grow, all of that. It all has an impact on our environment. Then there's an opportunity to educate, right? So when you're creating these bans, you can also educate on why you're banning these things. Sometimes people just won't understand, like, why can't I have balloons? Well, it's because, they can end up in the water. So this is just always a great opportunity to educate, so that in the future, you might not, they might never use them again at other events, because now they know what the issues are. So again, you communicate these attendee expectations as well as the vendor expectations before the event, by email, by social media, every possible way that you can, so that everybody kind of comes to the event already prepared to be, taking care of the space in a different way.
Vivian, if I can chime in, I'm watching some of the chat here about the behavioral change and how you kind of affected that at the last ultra with, I think it was capes and robes and.
Oh yeah, so we did a fun program at Ultra where we had a team that was already on the ground. So this was the team called Mission Control, and they were kind of part of our health and safety and security teams. They were previously trained just to be making sure that attendees were safe, that they had water if they needed it, that if they needed first aid or anything, they had kind of a first aid pack on their backpacks. And so we decided to, kind of give them some sustainability initiatives as well. So what we did was we gave them some capes. And so they were Ultra branded capes. They were really fun. The second that they walked out with them, people were like, "Where did you get that?" And then they would go around and they would find the cleaning crews and help the cleaning crews to clean up the grounds. And so what started happening is that, because we told them to have fun and to have the capes, and then to gift the cape to anyone who actually came and helped out, people got really excited about helping out and cleaning the grounds. So there's all sorts of really fun ways that you can incorporate preventing pollution into your actual event, as well as kind of promoting that, right? So if you tell people in advance, hey, look out for the bright blue capes. If you see them, then help them out and you might just get a free cape. So it's great ways to just keep everybody engaged. All right, and then as I said before, having visible signage is super important, making sure, at Ultra we did what was called a Leave No Trace campaign that was done in partnership with the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics, which is an actual organization that has been doing this for a very long time. So we had, with their help, a Leave No Trace initiative throughout the entire event. It was on signs as you were walking in. We had it on the back of all of the shirts that people wore on our cleaning crews and that staff, the mission control staff. And we also actually put it on the main stage screens and other stage screens in between DJ sets so that people could see that then. All right, I'm going to speed up because we're running out of time, but we'll move into waste reduction. So this is different from pollution prevention, right? Pollution prevention is about, making sure that your grounds don't get trashed. Waste reduction is about not putting the waste out there in the first place. So in some cases, this is waste that actually makes its way out to your attendees, right? Like plastic bottles, plastic cups, straws, napkins, all these things that end up on the ground. But then in other cases, it's back of house waste, right? So one of the things we want to think about is what ends up in our dumpsters after the event. What is this stuff that ends up filling up our dumpsters? And this is another opportunity to reduce your costs, right? Because we pay for waste management by weight. So if we suddenly reduce, thousands of pounds worth of waste out of our dumpsters, then we should have a cheaper waste management bill. So the main thing to remember here is that we want to reduce. We don't want to rely too much on recycling. There's a reason why reduce, reuse, recycle is always said in that order. Recycling should be a last resort. And here's why. Particularly here in Florida, we have a very, very difficult time with recycling. But if you're tuning in from anywhere else in the US, you'll know that the US is just not famous for our great recycling programs in the first place, right? So there's some states that have it really well under wraps, like California, but most states in the US just do not have a great handle on recycling due to a lot that has happened in the recycling market over the past few years. So we just don't want to rely on it. When we have to, right? If there's no other solution that makes sense for the budget, or if there's just nothing else we can do, then recycling is okay, but it's a very, very sensitive process. So we have to make sure that we're consulting with our local recycling facilities, that we're making sure that we're actually giving them recycling that they can recycle in a way that they can accept it. Because if not, it's all going into the recycling bins and it's not actually getting recycled. When you see a recycling bin at an event that has tons of trash in it, unfortunately, the likelihood is that that bin is going directly to the landfill. So these are things that we really have to think about as we're trying to reduce waste, and why we really just want to reduce the waste entirely. So as I mentioned before, the reusable cup programs are a great way to do that. You completely cut cups out of your waste stream entirely. And then back of house, for example, I know a lot of what I see back of house in dumpsters is wood, pallets and things that just get thrown out after. There are, nonprofit organizations and companies throughout, your community more than likely that could use those materials, use that wood. Sometimes I've seen furniture in dumpsters. We could donate that furniture. So it's about thinking about what's going to be there so that we can maybe find a home for it versus it ending up in a dumpster. And you can save some money. Okay, so nature conservation. So as Dan said, there's a difference between nature conservation and natural resource management. Nature conservation really thinks about the natural elements that are there on your site already, or natural elements that could be impacted by your event. So when you're thinking about nature conservation, if you're an outdoor event, you're always going to want to consult a local naturalist to see if there are any unique natural elements in your footprint that you want to protect. And you can work with them on how to do that, right? Whether you create barriers around it or you put up a sign that says, hey, I'm a really old tree, please don't nail into my trunk or run me over with a forklift. We really want to make sure that our whole team understands when those natural elements are present. And then if you're an indoor event, it's important to realize that even if you're indoors, even if you're inland, there are impacts on our environment, right? So if there's any storm drains, for example, that are right outside your event, and there's people that are hanging out outside your event and they're dropping their cigarette butts and they're dropping their cups or their straws or whatever it is, that ends up in our bay. Here in Miami specifically, but it ends up in our waterways regardless. Storm drains always have to lead to the water, and they don't go through the filtration that our sewers do and our other waters do. So it's something to be cognizant of, even if your event is all the way inland and not even appearing to be anywhere near the water. But then other things you can do is you can choose an environmental cause that matters to your team. You can choose to support ocean conservation, reforestation, wildlife protections. You can do something with an environmental group that's in your area, send a percentage of ticket sales to them or recruit volunteers for them, something to that effect, something that gives back to the nature that's present in your community. And then natural resource management is more about how you're using natural resources, so that primarily includes energy, water, and food. And it's also about how you are managing those resources once you're using them. So in one example, it's like thinking about how you're sourcing it, how the natural resource is coming to you, making sure that that process is sustainable. So for example, if you're using paper comes from trees. So we want to make sure that we're using either recycled paper or that we're using, a paper that isn't coming from, a virgin forest that is now being cut down just to make the paper for our event. And then there's everything from signage to staging. Everything has an impact. So it's thinking about how those things get to you, and then afterwards thinking about how their use impacts the environment. So this is where we get into carbon footprint, where we start thinking about whether or not we can use renewable energy instead of diesel and generators, whether or not we can encourage public transportation instead of having tons of people drive their cars to our event. This is where we can consider an offsetting program for the carbon footprint that we weren't able to eliminate. So there's tree plantings that you can do in your local area that will contribute to reducing carbon in the atmosphere. And then there's things you can think about with food. So when you choose local and organic food, that has a way less impact on the environment than shipping food from across the country and using food that probably has pesticides and all sorts of things that can be damaging to the environment on it. And then the big one here, and I know John Bushman, if he's in the room, would love this and will always tell you, make sure to have a plan for unsold food. This is why we put the Zero Hunger Sustainable Development Goal on this slide, because this is where you really have an opportunity to do a food rescue program that then has this unsold food go to local charities and you know, and it has people who really, really need it get fed. Another thing on the Sustainable Development Goals that I want to note is that sometimes it's not obvious how we're impacting these, but it's very, very important. So, for example, in the previous slide where we were talking about the storm drains, right? So you might be reducing waste, but somehow you're still impacting life underwater. So it's just important to think about these sustainable development goals and how you can use them to guide you in your processes. And then one of the last categories that Dan presented was community engagement. And this is what we were talking about, right? With how to engage your community, how to get everyone excited about participating in this event. This is kind of your marketing and communications plan of how you let everyone know what it is that you're doing and then how you get them excited about doing it. So a great strategy for this is to involve your marketing team. You know, they really know the best way to, you know, put your brand out there, doing it in a way that makes sense for your audience and that's consistent with your message. And another way to do this that's really, really important is to choose a team member or multiple team members who are excited about this and will be the ones thinking about how you can continue to engage your community. And finally, in your community, you will likely have environmental nonprofits that are already really, really in touch with what's going on in the local area, what it is that they need help with. These can be, you know, really, really great allies for you, and you can really help each other, right? The nonprofits can help you understand what's going on in your environment, and they can also, you know, kind of help you with volunteers, give you a way to give back to the community, etc. And then finally, one of the categories that we didn't mention in the beginning because it's a new consideration is public health. So when our events come back, we will obviously have to be thinking about health and safety and making sure that nobody's getting sick at our events. And sometimes the advice that has been going out is like, make sure everything is single-use, disposable, wrapped in plastic. You know, that stuff is really, really unsustainable, and it's not necessary. So there are ways to have proper cleaning and sanitation of everything that you're using. There are ways to provide things in bulk. For example, having hand washing or hand sanitizing stations versus giving everybody a little plastic bottle of hand sanitizer. There's a lot of ways that we can really you know, think about sustainability and have public health in mind at the same time. So we just don't want all of these health initiatives to be rolling back all of the progress that we've made on sustainability. And I think this one goes off to Dan.
Oh, thank you. Nothing that Vivian has offered here is difficult to do. It may be a challenge to do, but it's not going to be super costly to do. But it all comes from first having at least one person on staff that is really dedicated to this. And that person becomes the apostle for sustainability throughout the organization. If you do not have a director who is, if you do not have a director who is really into sustainability, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. And that's why we spent some time talking about what's in it for me. Because if they don't believe in the cause itself, we can still give them some good reasons why they should pay attention to sustainability. You begin building a network, particularly among the executives in the festival, so that they strategize together and they begin thinking together, how can we do this? They begin talking to the sustainability person, so they begin getting ideas of how this could be done, so it doesn't seem so impossible. And you're communicating to both the audience that you have and your vendors and the community as a whole. And then the two last steps are really important. Vivian was talking about what goes into the garbage cans. Well, that's kind of an audit of itself. what is the scrap that we're hauling away? How much did we reduce from last year? How much less did we pay for for trashing this year versus recycling? And then you build it into a report. And that report is not just for something that goes on the shelf, but it's something that you can share with the community. You can share it with people who need to be giving you permits next year. You can share it with groups that have maybe a uneasy feel about whether what you're doing is really sustainable or not. So it provides you the factual marketing tool of what you have done, and it also informs the next cycle of the planning. So all of these steps are important. The ones that I see oftentimes overlooked a little bit are the execute and audit and the report ones, but they all are important.
Is it my turn now?
Yes.
Okay. As previously mentioned, this program is a joint venture of FIU and SENFC. And I want to say that both of our organizations greatly appreciate the contribution of Vivian Belzaguy to today's program. Vivian's company, Ascendance Sustainable Events, works with event organizers who care about the environment and want to do something about their impact. The Ascendance team will meet with you where you're at, whether you're already on your way to being sustainable or far from it. It's important to start somewhere, anywhere, whether that's by taking a look at how to shift your internal operations, using your platforms to educate and engage your community, or so much more. Together, they'll work with you to make strides in the right direction. So visit Ascendance at ascendanceevents.com. And let's see, are we going to, I'm not sure which slide we're going to now. Questions and answers, okay. I think I'm going to turn this over now to our SENFC president, Francis Purvey, who has been monitoring the questions that you've been submitting.
Well, thank you, Stephen. And, you know, we have some very interesting questions here, thought-provoking, especially in these times of COVID, but hopefully overcome later on. But I want to say thanks to Dan and Vivian for your efforts in putting this together, and Stephen, of course, representing SENFC in the process. I do want to make a little quick promo for our next session. Will be on recycling on November 18th. So we'll hear more about that. And I thank everybody who's on the call right now, because I know that you're all engaged. One of the first questions is, how can you ask people to buy a cup when COVID-19 health guidelines are now single use? How do you navigate this?
So to my understanding, it is not a requirement to have single use. This is what is being recommended as an easy, fix to the problem, but it is not a requirement. And here's why. In food and safety guidelines, as long as the cups are sanitized and properly stored, there is not a need to be sustainable. If you look at the different, and these differ by state, I believe, by state health department. But if you look at the different guidelines that are put out, if you go to a restaurant, for example, and they have always used glass and they've always sanitized their glass and kept it stored, that restaurant is not now forced to use disposable. They are allowed to continue using glass as long as they are following the proper sanitation and storage guidelines of that glass. So let's look at the other side, right? Let's say that this restaurant was using glass and now it uses plastic, and the plastic is sitting in the same spot that the glass would have sat, and somebody sneezes on the plastic. Is it any different for the germs to be sitting on the plastic versus to be sitting on the sanitized glass? It is no different. So it's about your sanitation and your storage. And this is completely certified by health experts. I'm happy to pass along some links if we're going to do a a follow-up email. I can pass some links along where this has been like signed by hundreds of doctors that say it's perfectly safe to use sanitized, reusables instead of disposables.
Thanks, Vivian.
Welcome.
It's a tough time right now. We all accept that, and we are all learning as we go along. But the most important thing that we're saying is that we can't give up on sustainability as we move through this. There was a lot of discussion on this about, changing behavior. I mean, you're not going to have somebody do something at home and then expect them at the event to change. So everybody sort of recognized it in these comments that behavior change is so critical in a day-to-day life to make it successful at festivals and events. Do you have any comments on that?
Dan, do you want to speak on that?
Yeah, if I could chime in here
Sure.
on that. These festivals, if we're talking about music festivals, we're talking mostly of younger people, and they're usually going in groups. And so there is a peer pressure there that may not exist at home with mom and dad not recycling, but may exist if you can develop that kind of recognition, like Vivian was talking about with capes earlier. Make it fun, make it something that they think is a cool thing, and they will participate. And sometimes beliefs precede actions. Sometimes actions precede beliefs. And if you can get them in the mode of recycling at the event and being kind of conscious of it, they may begin being a little more conscious of that outside of the event as well.
Right, and I'm so happy that you mentioned that about perception, because I just saw Todd's comment about what is perceived to be safe, right? And what is perceived to be difficult, what is perceived to be, too challenging to figure out, right? This is all this is why the awareness of how easy or how safe or how, how this can all happen and work is so important. So when we're talking about what's perceived to be difficult, right? The issue might be, oh, recycling is too difficult. Well, if I'm at an event and I see, okay, no, I just put my plastics in here and my glass in here and my paper in here, or however it's sorted. We have single stream, so that's not the way that it works here in Miami, but I don't know if other states in Florida or cities in Florida do that differently. But once a person experiences it to be easy, then that perception changes, right? We're then shifting the mindset of, oh, that's not that hard, or oh, that's too difficult, into, oh, that's not that hard. I'm going to do that at home too. In the same way that what's perceived to be safe is something that we can continue to educate on, because that's part of your community engagement campaign, right? So when you're doing safety initiatives at your events moving forward, I imagine that you're going to say, hey, attendees, here are all the things that we're doing to make sure that we're keeping you safe. And so that's where you have the opportunity to educate and change that perception on, oh, only disposables are safe. Well, no, this is how we're doing it. And here's a link to all the doctors that have said that this is perfectly safe. So it's kind of on us as the event organizers to educate and to use our platforms to shift those perceptions and then prove it, right?
And do it in a fun way, like you were
Right.
suggesting that the sign on protecting the old tree. There are ways of doing it that will still cause a smile.
Right.
We've been talking about plastics and single-use plastics, but one of the questions is, what are the affordable and viable options for dishes and cutlery?
So this really, really depends on where you are. Here in Miami, I have a great contact. It's a company called Lean Orb. Their website is leanorb.com. They do tons of research on what is the highest quality, most affordable, different disposable ware that can be used. It also really depends on what your goal is from a waste reduction perspective, and what your local recycling facilities are able to accept. Here in Miami, in that situation, our recycling facilities do not accept any plastics, basically, that aren't plastic water bottles or jugs. So when it comes to, a lot of these like plastic clamshells, plastic cups, plastic cutlery, none of that is actually recycled here. So that's when you have to completely shift off of plastic onto other materials. And what I found is that the materials that kind of look like cardboard, they're kind of like a molded fiber. Those are the ones that seem to be least expensive here. And in a lot of cases, if you don't have a distributor of this locally, there's also some national brands like World Centric is one, and then there's stuff on Amazon as well. Amazon, we know, is not the most sustainable option for getting supplies, but if it's in the name of reducing your waste, then sometimes we got to look the other way on sometimes so that we can source things. But Amazon definitely has some great options, and also local restaurant supply stores. That's actually where I've found the cheapest stuff, right? And sometimes I just have to go with like, the paper versus the plastic, right? Sometimes it's just kind of standard paper instead of this like really, compostable paper, but at least that's better than a plastic.
I just want to give a shout out. We have several partners in SENFC that have catalogs or have programs of sustainable products also. One is Coastal Connections. That's coastal-connections.org. And they have a catalog out. And so I got to give a shout out to them. This is a different question though. Are there any granting agencies out there that might be able to help nonprofits towards more sustainable events, and any kind of local government incentives that you know of to host sustainable events?
That I know of, no, unfortunately. And that's something that I think has to change. It's something that I have talked to the city of Miami here locally about. It's something that there's been interest in, but hasn't fully come to fruition, unfortunately. I can imagine, and I would hope that in some other city in Florida, there might be some programs like this. And I'd encourage you to look into your local government. And if not, start asking the question. Sometimes we think that, oh, none of this is available to us. But if we're not the ones prompting the question and creating demand for programs like that, then how do we ever expect for them to come into existence? So I suggest that if there's nothing that you can find on your local community websites, or that you can see in kind of your government offerings for grants, then start pressuring your commissioners, your mayor, your different representatives to have programs like that, because it's your voice that starts to create demand and starts to prompt them to making these things happen in the future.
And one last question we have here. Events are already expensive endeavors, and festivals are expensive. We want to make sure that being sustainable doesn't take away any of that wow factor or the commitment of other planners to do the same. Suggestions that you might have on a bigger picture of how we move forward to make festivals, festival planners, other festival planners and other meeting planners more aware of the sustainability efforts.
More aware of their own sustainability efforts, or of the sustainability efforts that they can?
Get them engaged.
So there's lots of great information online, including in the guide that's on my website, which is most of the information that was in this presentation. It's a great way to just kind of forward something to different event organizers and say, hey, these are some easy ways that you can get started. A lot of the information that's available online beyond my guide is really, it's about kind of giving you the tools to do it on your own. There's of course ways to bring on companies like mine or like others that can help with this if that's in the budget, but I realize that it may not be for many events, especially as we're coming out of this crazy time. But yeah, there's lots of great information out there, and if you follow the process that Dan was leading us through of assigning people on your team that really care about this, having them engage, and then working that through your whole organization, then that's really a way. But it kind of starts at the top, right? It starts at the organizers, it starts at the planners, it starts at the vendors. That internal community really has to care. Someone in there really has to care. And then that's what starts, moving it around the internal community so that it can come out to that external community. But yeah, there's tons of resources online on how to do it, and you know, I encourage you to research.
Well, I do want to say to everybody that SENFC, Sustainable Events Network Florida and Caribbean, is a resource to everybody who is looking to do this. We are expanding our website to be a better resource or a strong resource for everybody. I think we've got some interesting discussions here today, and I thank Dan, Stephen, and Vivian for your expert input on this. Again, this presentation will be made available later on to people who registered. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I'd like to wrap it up. We're looking at our last slide. And as I had mentioned earlier, a recording of today's presentation will be made available on the SENFC website at senfc.org. And if you'd like a copy of the PowerPoint file to make a presentation to your group, please get in touch with Dan Cormany or Francis Purvey through their contact information shown on this slide. And before we go, I'd like to mention some things about the folks behind today's program. I already talked about Vivian and her great company, but I'd also like to tell you a little about FIU, the Florida International University's Chaplin School of Hospitality and Tourism Management has been distinguished as one of the top hospitality programs in the United States. More than 2,000 undergraduate and graduate students from across the nation and around the world choose FIU for its outstanding reputation, advantageous campus locations, expert faculty, such as Dr. Cormany, rich curriculum, and fast-track career opportunities in the international hotel, food service, and tourism industries. You can visit their website for all of the great opportunities. The Sustainable Events Network, Florida and Caribbean, has a mission to lead the meetings and events industry in the advancement of sustainable practices in Florida and the Caribbean. When you join SENFC, you're supporting the achievement of this mission, and you enable us to do things like presenting today's free program. And here's a little plug from our chief membership enthusiast, Lisa Pickersgill, who's on this call. In honor of Earth Day being April 22nd, annual dues are only $22. For that low amount, you can help us save our planet. And you can also affix our membership logo to your email signature to show others that you have an environmental consciousness. And we know you have this consciousness or you wouldn't have tuned in on today's program. So please visit senfc.org and join us. And last thing I'd like to say as a reminder, as Sue Flack has mentioned in the chat and Francis mentioned, please join us on November 18th, where Sue is going to conduct a great panel on recycling. So unless any of my fellow presenters have anything else to say, I think it's goodbye.
Well, I just want to thank you all for having me. Hang on, let's do a mute so that there's no echo.